Okay, everybody, welcome. For those who are signing in, welcome. I'm Charles Small, speaking to you from Oxford. Welcome to the ISGAP seminar series, webinar series. And before we start, as people are still signing in, I just want to let you know that next week we'll continue with our webinars. On Monday, we have Professor Dina Parat who will be speaking. And next Wednesday, we have Dr. Jacques Gauthier, who's a human rights lawyer and a historian from Canada. And he'll be speaking on Jerusalem. He does very important research. And tomorrow, I would like everybody to please note this because this is new to our schedule. Given the crisis that's taking place in the United States, we're having a panel discussion on looking at issues of racism and anti-Semitism. And we have a very important group of colleagues who will be with us. Dr. Abebe Zagaya, a professor from Oxford and from Ethiopia. Professor Katya Merovich, she teaches in our summer program. Carlton Long, the director of ISGAP's pedagogy program at the summer school in Oxford. We have Victoria Kamsler, Professor Ansel Brown, a professor of law at North Carolina University, Suni Ali from Northwestern, and Harold Bennett, who's the chair. He's a professor of philosophy at Morehouse College. He's the Martin Luther King Professor of Philosophy at Morehouse College, and he's also a graduate of our Oxford summer programs. So we're going to be dealing with sort of these momentous times in the United States, and we'll be discussing ways forward. How do we develop policies to deal with structural racism in the United States? So today we'll switch gears. It's an honor to host two very important scholars and leaders in the fight against anti-Semitism and the study against anti-Semitism. We have Dr. Arnon Groiss, who's a scholar of Middle East Studies, and he's also a former broadcaster in Israel. And David Bedein, who's the director of the Center for Near East Policy and Research. And today they're going to speak about their ongoing and very important research regarding UNRWA and their war on the Jews, holding UNRWA donors responsible. So this has been in the news periodically thanks to the work of Dr. Groiss and David Bedein. Dr. Groiss is a scholar of Middle East Studies. He has a PhD from Princeton University. He was a journalist in the Arabic language service of the Israel Broadcasting Authority for more than 42 years. He was a researcher assessing the attitude of the other and peace in the Middle East, looking at curricula, examining over 1,000 school books of Egypt, Syria, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Tunisia, and the Palestinian Authority, which is a very important subject. It's the future generation to understand what they're learning is essential. Since 2000, since the Palestinian Authority established its own education curriculum, Dr. Groiss has examined over 364 Palestinian school books and 109 teaching guides, all of which use the UNRWA schools criteria. He just completed a 4-year research project on the Palestinian Authority's education curriculum, which was adopted in 2016. Currently, he presents his scholarly research around the world, including at the United Nations, the Knesset, the Canadian Parliament, the United States Congress, the European Parliament, and in other important institutions around the world. David Bedein is a community organizer, a writer, and an investigative journalist. He pioneered Israel's resource news agency in 1987 at the Beit Argon Press Center in Jerusalem, and I actually met him around that time many years ago when the Oslo Accords were being signed, and we had I don't know if he remembers, but I remember having a big debate with him. He was opposed, and he turned out, for the reasons why he was opposed, he was right, and I was wrong. That's a whole other story. He's currently the director of the Center for Near East Policy Research, and he's been doing this since 2005. His focus for the past 33 years of work is shedding light on UNRWA and its anti-Semitic policy and how it indoctrinates the descendants of the 1948 refugees through their education curriculum. And under the promise that they inculcate of the so-called right of return by Palestinians. He's the author of many books and important articles, including Roadblock to Peace, UNRWA, Policies Reconsidered, and the Genesis of the Palestinian Authority. He's produced films and published many articles. So it's really an honor to have both of these scholars and experts in a very integral part of the conflict between Israel and the Palestinian Authority, education. So please, gentlemen, you have the floor.
Thank you.
The first thing we'd like to do, first of all, thank you for having us today. And nothing better than seeing is believing. A picture is worth 1,000 words. Working with Palestinian Arab journalists, we have commissioned 24 films over the last 12 years. And we're going to show a snippet of one of our latest films where we go into the classrooms and show what's being taught in an UNRWA classroom and what's happening in the UNRWA schoolyard. So let's look at 2.5-minute clip. Go right ahead.
David, just so you know, people are complaining that you should speak louder somehow.
Okay, we're going.
إسرائيل راح يتم على يد الفلسطينيين.
At UNRWA schools, education is not limited to texts and is not confined to the classroom. Inside schoolyards, students pass by violent graffiti that glorifies killers. One of the Palestinian heroes is Dalal Mughrabi, whose image adorns alleyways near UNRWA schools and neighborhoods. In 1978, she led a terror gang that commandeered a bus and murdered 38 passengers, including 13 children. On the paths of UNRWA camps, children speak about Mughrabi with awe and reverence.
صور شهداء سووا عمليات الناس سووا عمليات لأجل الوطن يعني دلال المغربي سوت عملية تفجير وفجرت حالها عند الجيش
يعني زي أخت وأم بنت بلدي.
دلال المغربي هي شهيدة فلسطينية فجرت اليهود وهجرتهم.
دلال المغرب أول شهيدة فلسطينية فجرت من الجيش الإسرائيلي يعني سوت عملية استشهادية.
UNRWA schools portray Mughrabi as a role model. In its current curriculum, Mughrabi's photo appears in a study book for third graders. It is a key lesson in Our Beautiful Language, a new textbook issued in 2019. On page 63, pupils learn to chant the Land of the Nobles. The assignment calls for kids to liberate Palestine and to exterminate the current residents of Israel, the Jews. Here they chant the song in the classroom. Their lethal melodies do not resonate just in the classroom. Here, a teacher leads the same war song during a field trip as children prepare for the liberation of Palestine with toy guns.
وأزيل الغاصب من بلدي وأبيد فلول الغرباء يا بلد الأقصى والحرم يا مهد النخوة والكرم صبرا صبرا فالنصر لنا والفجر يطل من الظلم قسما سأضحي بدمائي لأروي أرض الكرماء لأروي أرض الكرماء
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm glad we had the opportunity to begin this program with something very real. For the last 33 years, as Dr. Small mentioned, I've been working on the subject of UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, which keeps children, and now it's upwards of 500,000 children in these schools, in addition to the 5 million people who wander, who are part of who live in 59 refugee camps. What's most important is that the curriculum they're using is a curriculum prepared by the Palestine Liberation Organization and used by UNRWA. Now, what's unbelievable is that a terrorist organization uses a curriculum of a terror group, and the idea behind it, which Israel initially accepted, oh, if they go to a United Nations school, they'll act different. They'll learn a curriculum based on peace. We've examined, thanks to Dr. Groiss's work, and he'll be presenting some of his very serious research in a minute, we've examined every school book that's been introduced in the last 20 years. And there's one message: liberate all of Palestine by force of arms and kill Jews while you do it. It's rather hard to believe that child murder is what is being fostered, what is being taught. And on our website, IsraelBehindTheNews.com, we have all our films and research presented. So this is the way to look at it. And what's most important to understand is that UNRWA does not report to the United Nations. It reports to donor nations. And those donor nations are supposed to oversee the curriculum, and they don't do their job. Let me stop here and have Dr. Groiss perhaps present some of his academic research, which speaks for itself. Thank you again, ISGAP, for having us here today.
Thank you.
Thank you, David. I would like to say that UNRWA provides grade 1 to 10 education in over 250,000 children in the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem, who are considered descendants of the Palestinian refugees of 1948 war, and who constitute about a quarter of the total Palestinian student body there. Now, school books for UNRWA schools, as said by David, are provided by the Palestinian Authority. And thorough study of these books has revealed that they legitimize both Israel's existence as well as the Jewish presence in this country, including the denial of Jewish history and the existence of Jewish holy places there. And then the second fundamental of these books is demonization of both Israel and Jews. And the third one is advocacy of a violent struggle for total liberation of Palestine instead of peace education. By using these books in its schools, UNRWA violates its mandate as a UN agency, both vis-a-vis Israel, which is a full member of the UN, and by working against the UN official goal of a peaceful resolution of the Middle East conflict. That this conduct or behavior should cease. I would like to present to you a few examples and start with the legitimization of the state of Israel, Israel's existence. Here you see Israel pre-67 territory is presented as territories occupied in 1948. This is a chart of numbers or figures of Palestinians in several regions. Among them, it's in bold letters, the territories occupied in 1948, not Israel. A second example is instead of using the phrase the state of Israel, second one, yeah. Instead of using the phrase the state of Israel, they use the phrase the Zionist occupation. You can see here about that the agreement, the armistice agreements in Rhodes in 1949 was signed by several Arab countries and the Zionist occupation. The third example, that Palestine replaces Israel in this region in the Middle East as the sovereign state. And this is a map of countries of the Arab homeland, so to speak, and with the flag of Palestine on the whole country, which is in one color and named Palestine. Now, what about the Jews? Jewish cities, Jewish cities, you can see here two maps of from 2019, both of them, books which were published lately. And in both maps, you cannot see the city of Tel Aviv, for example, or Nahariya or Netanya or any other Jewish city which was established in modern days. Only the old cities of where it used to be settled by Arabs. So Jews do not exist in this country according to Palestinian maps. Next. The Hebrew language is erased from a British mandatory coin reproduced in a Palestinian mathematics textbook. And you can see on the left side, the original, the photocopy of the original coin with the Hebrew inscription on. Jerusalem is said to be an Arab country, an Arab city established by Arabs thousands of years ago. The Jebusites and Canaanites are considered to be Arabs, and it's holy to Christians and Muslims only. Jews are not mentioned in this context, and the Jewish holy places are said to be Muslim. For example, you see here the Kotel, the Western Wall in Jerusalem, and it says that it's the part of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and it is the exclusive right of the Muslims alone. Jews are not, it's not considered a Jewish holy places, a Jewish holy place. Demonization of Israel, as I said, it starts with many, many accusations. I counted over 40 accusations in many, many fields, and it can reach some absurdity. For example, here it is said that Israel is responsible for letting loose herds of wild boars into Palestinian fields. This is one example. There are other accusations as well. For example, Israel is depicted as a source of all evil, including genocidal intentions towards the Palestinians, as you can see from this example. Let's move over to Jews. This is part taken from a teacher guide in evaluation of the student achievements, and the last or the bottom part, which is marked in red, the subject is clarification of the Zionist gang's goals in perpetrating massacres. Now, the good student who gets 3 is the one who connected the massacres with Jewish thinking, and the one who is not good enough, the last one on the left, is the one who said what the reasons for the massacres were, but without connecting them to the Zionist or Jewish thinking. Jews are also described outside of the conflict as enemies of Islam from its very early days. They were supposed to, they are presented as the one who wanted to kill Prophet Muhammad, for example, which is a very grave accusation in a very traditional society like the Palestinians. They are further described as devil aids in a poem, which is trying to show the need to liberate the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Devil's aids infidels. Now let's move over to the third and final point, or fundamental of Palestinian education, which is also taught in UNRWA schools. The absence, total absence of any education for peace, but rather advocacy of a violent struggle for the liberation of the whole of Palestine. Here you can see an example for grade 1, a soldier with the flag conquering the country, the homeland. The next example is a map, or actually an artifact, which is sold to tourists. It says Free Palestine with the Palestinian flag all over the country, which means actually that in Free Palestine, there is no room for Israel. The next example is inserting the religious element into the struggle, thus transforming it from a political or national struggle into a religious one with no hope of achieving any peace. I am a Muslim. I am sacrificing in order to liberate Al-Aqsa mosque. So this is the religious element in the struggle. Martyrdom is one of the ideals taught to school children. And here you can see a piece taken from a teacher's guide, which explains to the teacher how to indoctrinate the kids so that they will believe in martyrdom for the sake of the religion and also for Palestine. The right of return. Right of return is not to Israel. The right of return is to liberated Palestine with the Palestinian flag. It's part and parcel of the liberation struggle. Terror is part and parcel of the liberation struggle, as you can already saw this is part of grade 5 textbook, Dalal al-Mughrabi. And this is the poem you also heard about it, killing the Jews, the remnants of the defeated Jews in this country, 6 million of them. And the children singing that in class. And the last piece, it's a part of a story which describes the Jews burned in a civilian bus in a Molotov cocktail attack near Ramallah as a barbecue party. So these are the examples, and these examples are taught in UNRWA schools.
Thank you.
That's it. Thank you. Okay. So thank you both very much. So we're going to open our conversation to Q&A. We have people who are online with us, and if people send me your questions, I'll try to incorporate and present as many of the questions as possible. So my first initial question would be to Arnon. Arnon, I could sort of understand the PLO and their ideology, which is connected or rooted in the Muslim Brotherhood, that they are ideologically driven to reject the Jew, to reject Israel. I get it. And for this to be reflected in their education at some level is not a surprise. But what I find surprising, I think most people would find surprising, is can you speak to how UNRWA is part of the United Nations? It's funded by major democratic countries from around the world. How is it possible after the Holocaust, after Europe did what it did to the Jewish people, that European countries are somehow implicated in this, it's not even revisionist history, it's a history, it's an education that it's inciting to extermination. How can European countries in 2020 be connected to this process?
We asked, sir, under certain circumstances when we toured Europe and other countries as well, and we didn't get an answer actually. People say, well, these are refugees, we need to help them, we need to support them, we need to do this and that, and human rights and so on and so on. They don't really actually want to discuss this particular issue. And I think it should be approached, they should approach and be asked about that again and again until they realize that what they are doing is actually impossible.
So which European countries or North American countries are implicated in UNRWA in supporting?
I mean, there is a list of donor nations and even groups like Real Madrid, the sports group. I mean, it's really ridiculous. And Canada and United States and Arab countries and Sweden and other countries. I mean, there is a whole list of dozens of states and non-states.
Let me be very specific in terms of who are the nations that are now responsible. What has to be pointed out is the United States government did its own investigation. GAO, the Government Accounting Office, revealed that the UNRWA story that they gave the US Congress, that they had a separate peace education to balance this, doesn't exist. UNRWA was then cut off by the United States government. Now, the countries currently funding UNRWA, the leading one is Germany. Germany is the leading funder of UNRWA. Our attempts to meet with the Office of Chancellor Merkel has so far not succeeded. We did go to Germany with the accompaniment of the Rabbi Cooper of the Simon Wiesenthal Center, myself and Dr. Groiss. We were there. We met with 7 German parliamentarians. They were shocked to see what's going on. UNRWA uses a public relations firm to try to put out the word that they have a peace education system and that this doesn't exist. UNRWA, the United Nations itself, did not have access to the school books of UNRWA because UNRWA said we just can't get a hold of them. We met 5 times with the office of the Secretary General of the UN, and that's what they told us. Now, the nations that are the leading nations are Germany, Saudi Arabia, England, Sweden, Holland, Denmark, Italy, France, and also Australia. These are the leading countries. Their constituencies, their citizens need to know about this. The lobby that UNRWA has established in every country mitigates against this. They say, well, they keep saying this can't possibly be. We are for peace. We have programs of tolerance, etc. Dr. Groiss got a hold of their programs for tolerance for everyone but Jews. And the school books have deteriorated in the last 3 years. That's what Dr. Groiss found. By the way, I want to be very clear about something. In terms of our research, if the Center for Near East Policy Research ever discovered one school book produced by the Palestinian Authority and used by UNRWA, which was for peace, we'd put it out tomorrow morning. We would be very popular. However, because we put out the truth, many people don't want to see this, and nations don't want to see this. It messes up the idea that children are learning in a United Nations school must be okay. So those are your leading countries, and the fact that Germany is the leading funder of UNRWA after all that Germany did. Remember, the Holocaust began in the classroom, and that's something that Germany needs to know. And right now, we're looking to raise the money to put out all of our films and our studies and our investigations in the German language, so that the German people can't say again, we didn't know.
It's unbelievable. I'm sure I know the issues a bit. If I still find it shocking to hear. Do you think, very briefly, and I'll get to the other questions, given the changing geostrategic issues in the Middle East and perhaps the opening in the Gulf states, are there Gulf states or some interests in the region that would be supportive of changing the curriculum?
Oh yeah, they're making it much worse.
They're making it worse.
The last 3 years, while the Gulf states and Saudi Arabia have improved their public relations in Israel and around the world, they've increased their funding to UNRWA and the Palestinian Authority school curriculum. Dr. Groiss's research, which is pristine, you can see it on our website, israelbehindthenews.com, shows in the last 3 years when the Gulf states and UNRWA have gotten involved, it's gotten much worse. However, they put out the good public relations. They know how to smile. They know how to dance. They know how to have Jewish leaders. When we try to confront all the Jewish organizations with what Saudi Arabia and Qatar are doing with UNRWA, their response was to go to Saudi Arabia and have cocktail parties. Sorry, this is not acceptable.
Okay. Interesting. So we have many questions.
I want to add, if possible, that's right, what he says, because there is a severe deterioration beginning in 2016. I mean, which is uncomparable to the books which were ugly before that, but not as ugly as these ones.
Crazy. So we have a question from an anonymous attendee. If Palestinian children are indoctrinated and brainwashed to hate Israel and the Jewish people, while children in Israel are not, how feasible do you think we'll be able to have a peaceful coexistence between the two neighbors and the two states in the future if they want Israel's complete annihilation? So in other words, is the education is creating the framework or the foundation for no peace?
When we started doing the issue of filming the kids, and this goes back 30 years, we didn't see we saw some of the hatred. But today, we don't see hatred, we see something much worse. Children react in an automaton kind of a fashion, in a machine-like fashion, saying, I'm from, like 30 years ago when I did an interview with children in an UNRWA camp, they would say, I'm from Jaffa, ha, 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 ha. Now I'm from Jaffa, I'm going to kill everyone in Jaffa because they murdered my grandfather and raped my grandmother. And the termination, I don't see hatred. I see a preparation for total war. And that's much worse. And there is no possibility of a peace process with an entity preparing itself for war. Military, now these are, by the way, things that donor countries shouldn't accept. Military parades, honoring anyone who is connected to someone who murdered a Jew, having ceremonies for him at the schools. Why don't the donor countries demand a confiscation of school books which promote the concept of murder and extermination of the Jews? Now they have it. In the Knesset, in the previous Knesset, we're going to start it again, a lobby was established for reform of UNRWA, inviting all the donor nations to come and see. So that you can't say they don't know, but we have to keep at it and keep going, because the misinformation and disinformation and lack of wanting to believe what we're showing is continuing. So again, it's not hate education, it's war education.
So two quick questions we have from Andrea Spindel. She says that the current Canadian government reinstated funding to UNRWA and actually increased it.
Mm-hmm.
What is the best strategy to embarrass and confront the Canadian government with this, especially as it's unlikely that the media will tell the full story?
Well, first of all, the media will tell you the full story if you give the media the opportunity. The reason that Canada pulled out of UNRWA was because the efforts we made, and we're very pleased that some Canadians did help us out. We came to the Canadian Parliament 4 times with the curriculum. Dr. Groiss came on all occasions, and we brought some Palestinian Arabs from refugee camps and showed how there's no accountability for the funds. We provided the Canadian government at that time, we're talking 10 years ago, with the evidence that Hamas took over the unions, the workers unions, and the teachers unions. And guess what? The Canadian Parliament and the Canadian government were with us. Ever since Canada reinstated the money for no reason, we've been asking Canadians, bring our experts in front of Parliament. And by the way, we not only bring experts, we also bring people whose family members have been murdered by UNRWA teachers, UNRWA students, UNRWA principals involved in first-degree murder. And that speaks more than anything else when you bring people, the human element. I happen to be a social worker by profession, but when you bring people who have suffered the ultimate consequence of children and adults from UNRWA being trained to murder, that does resonate, and the media will cover it.
Thank you. Another question from Sam Solomon. He asks, it seems that Israel does not want UNRWA to be shut down for defense reasons. Without the support of the Israeli government, the European countries can hide behind this. Can you please comment on this?
Very important point. We do not see the closure of UNRWA as a possibility. You can't close UNRWA without the approval of the United Nations General Assembly. It'll never happen. We have now briefed, for the first time in the last 6 months, we have briefed the movers and shakers of Israeli intelligence who had never seen the school books, who had never seen the films, who had never gone into the schools. They had a laissez-faire attitude. That is changing. So again, what we're trying to do with the Israeli government is get the Israeli government to approve reforms in UNRWA. And by the way, the first head of the Israel Civil Administration in '67, we met with him, Shlomo Lahat, may he rest in peace. And he explained to us, according to Israeli law, Israel has to intervene and stop school books and teachers which are inciting. So this is where the Israeli government is coming around. They have to be encouraged. And by the way, let me give you a scoop for this program, which no one is emphasizing. In the new peace plan, which is now being discussed, which is promoted by the current U.S. administration, there's unprecedented demands of the American government that the incitement curriculum be dropped, and then by the pay to slay, the offer of an incentive and gratuity for anyone who murders a Jew, that be dropped. Before any discussion of annexation, sovereignty, or anything else, that is the prerequisite. And the concept here is to hold the American government to that principle. And that's so important. And UNRWA is directly involved in that incitement. How can it be that UNRWA schools, and you can see our films, which are decorated with pictures and drawings and murals of people who have committed acts of premeditated murder? How can the donor nations allow that to go on? That can be stopped. The curriculum can be stopped. And these are issues which are right now directly involved in the process. We say in my field of social work that a problem is a problem when someone makes it into a problem. If 10 people who hear this program contact the White House and contact the UN and contact the donor nations, which are listed on our website, IsraelBehindTheNews.com, you contact the foreign ministries, it doesn't take many people to say promoting murder is not appropriate.
So what's your website, David?
IsraelBehindTheNews.com.
Okay, thank you. We have another question from RH. I don't know who RH is, but it's an interesting question. What about Nathan Brown's study, who wrote a short but comprehensive review of an article about textbooks used by the Palestinians, focusing especially on the changes which began in 1994 with the Oslo agreements? And this resulted in the dismantling, according to this question, of the Israeli office responsible for censorship of textbooks. Administration of the education system for all Palestinian students in the West Bank and Gaza was taken over by the PA. Other Palestinian schools administered by UNRWA in neighboring countries were unaffected. With the end of the UNESCO monitoring the books, UNRWA moved to develop a supplementary material to teach tolerance in the schools it administered, according to this statement. It is the PA textbooks used in UNRWA schools in the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem that have been the most extensively studied. The following discussion cannot be generalized to UNRWA schools elsewhere. In the beginning, which I think you did, the PA used books from Jordan and Egypt. In 2000, it started issuing its own books. Nathan Brown investigated the differences between these schools. Can you comment on that?
Yeah.
Arnon, you want to say something?
Yeah, I can comment. The books used in the West Bank and Gaza were, before '67, Jordanian and Egyptian books respectively. When Israel took over the West Bank and Gaza, it changed the books. The books remained the same, but the anti-Semitic and virulent material was taken out of the books. There were censors in a way. Now, when the Palestinian Authority took over in 1994, it changed, it reintroduced the older books with the incitement against Israel and against the Jews. And when Israel complained, the Palestinian Authority told them, the Israelis, and also the Americans, that they are going to issue their own books. And these are not Palestinian books, they are Jordanian and Egyptian books, and then everything will be okay. And they started to introduce their books beginning in 2000 until 2006, grade 1 to 12. And then in 2016 until this day, they just completed the project. And we found out that the three fundamentals I talked about were all there. I mean, there were some changes for the better, if you compare it to the older Jordanian and Egyptian textbooks, that there were no crude anti-Semitic material, but other than that, everything was as I told you. Now, the books of 2016 are much, much worse than those before, because in the books of 2000 to 2006, there was some recognition of Jewish history in this country, for example. And Israel was called Israel. They said Israelis are killing our children. Now they say the Zionist occupation kills our children because Israel is a concrete entity. And in 2016, they are trying to deal not with a concrete entity, but with a mythical evil entity, world Zionism. So there, it was not a curriculum for peace from the very beginning. And as far as I remember, Professor Nathan Brown issued his research straight after the beginning of the project, and he didn't cover the later books, let's say from 2003, 2004, which were much worse than those of 2000, because in 2000 they issued the books of grade 1 and grade 6. So the book speaks for themselves.
Let me add two things which are very important. One, when it was announced that the PA was going to issue its own school books, I asked Yasser Arafat, what's going to be in the books? Are you going to be issuing books of peace? And he said, absolutely, and gave us the opportunity to see them. In the 6-year period from 94 to 2000, the donor nations that were giving the money were promised the school books, and we went to each of their consulates, and they wouldn't give them. We got them. We met with the Minister of Education, and every year we've been going back and getting further books and buying them at their school books stores. Now, in terms of tolerance and stuff like that, we were assured by all the donor nations that they'd been told by UNRWA and by the PA that there was a curriculum for tolerance and understanding. And this is what they told APAC and everyone else. So we asked, and we couldn't get them, so we got them through the Norwegian government. Thanks to Norway, we were able to see them. We gave them to Dr. Groiss. Dr. Groiss will mention in a minute what was in them, but nothing about tolerance or accepting of Israel. Let me stop my sentence there and have Dr. Groiss continue. But what they did was to hire PR firms, public relations firms, to put out the word that happy days are here again. UNRWA is now involved in tolerance and understanding. And Dr. Groiss, why don't you continue?
Yeah, UNRWA issued additional books. I mean, the books which I was talking about are mandatory. They should be used in all schools, government schools, private schools, UNRWA schools, whatever. Islamic foundations, Christian churches, any school in the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem which follows the Palestinian curriculum. Now, non-governmental authorities can issue additional books to be taught to the students in their under the sponsorship. But these books are mandatory. Now, UNRWA issued books which were very good books, talking about tolerance, about obedience to your parents, non-smoking, and all very good stuff with any reference to the conflict, to the Jews, except for 2 cases. One of them, there was a picture of children flying kites in Gaza, and the inscription said, "Children in Gaza fly kites in spite of the siege." Another example, a family sitting next to a ruined house. How can we help this family in rebuilding its house? That's all. All other stuff was non-relevant, irrelevant regarding the conflict itself. But these books were not liked by the Palestinian teachers. And as far as I remember, 2, 3, or 4 years ago, the PTO in Gaza, Parents and Teacher Organization, ordered the parents to burn all these books because they wrote, I think, in one textbook that Jerusalem was sacred or holy to Jews as well. As far as I remember, I'm not sure. I cannot sign that. Yeah, they burned it. I mean, I don't think that these books exist anymore.
That's correct.
Maybe in the West Bank, but not in Gaza.
Okay, Avram Zurov asked a question. In addition to getting the member nations of UNRWA to stop funding it, what else could be done to realistically try to reform the educational programming?
First of all, the idea is not to stop the funding, but to condition the funding. We'll give 54% of the UNRWA budget comes from the school, of the UNRWA education budget comes from UNRWA. In other words, 54% of UNRWA goes to education. You could always ask the donor nations, hold back on the funds for education until the education looks like a United Nations education. That's a very simple thing to do. The other thing you can do is ask for full transparency. How can it be that cash comes into UNRWA and we have no idea what happens with that cash? This is a very, very serious issue. There are several areas of organized crime in Gaza and also throughout Judea, Samaria, where money winds up in. So how about a full accounting for every penny? You know, it's $1.2 billion comes into UNRWA, most of which is not accounted for. And you always have UNRWA crying about the fact that they don't have money. Well, let's see how you're using your money. Let's see if there's a possibility of corruption, a possibility of payoffs to workers, to UNRWA officials. Let's take a look at that. And that's currently being examined by several European countries.
Here's a critical question. Somebody's asking, the examples that you were giving about the content of Palestinian textbooks are of course, and I'm quoting, deplorable and unfortunate. And this person has no argument, this anonymous questioner has no argument about this. However, do you think that what do you think of education for peace when your land is occupied and is going to be annexed year after year? Is this perceived as education for submission or education for peace? How do you?
Well, first of all, their concept, the word they use is not for occupation, but for conquest. And they're talking about all of Palestine. The occupied territories they're dealing with are what they lost in 1948 more than anything else: Ashkelon, Ashdod, Beersheba, etc. And basically, you can deal with the situation if you recognize reality on the ground, and that's what many Arab Jewish interaction groups do. They recognize reality on the ground, but the issue of claiming everything that they lost in 48, and by the way, there's no Palestinian Arab child who's ever taught that there happened to have been 7 armies, Arab armies, that invaded Israel on May 14, 1948 to wipe it out. That's not in any consciousness whatsoever. By the way, the Nakba concept was when was it started? In 1998 as a tactic. So that you would think they were going back to 48. No, this is used only in the very recent period of time to get it into the children's heads and get it in the children's head that the Zionist occupiers came, wiped them out, and they did so violently. What happened in 48 happened in terms of the exchange of populations, and get over it, keep going. And there's enough, there's more than 300 peace advocacy organizations in Israel that would like to work with Palestinian Arabs. But there's another issue here, which is very, very important to understand. The PLO is run like a totalitarian dictatorship, does not allow any dissent, does not allow anyone who demonstrates his desire to do dialogue with Jews can be arrested and punished very seriously.
I would like to add, Israel and the Palestinians have an agreement, the Oslo Accords, according to which the PLO recognized Israel as a sovereign state, and the parties decided to go on certain stages towards peace between them with mutual recognition. And this particular letter by Arafat to Rabin at the eve of the Oslo agreement, signing of the Oslo agreement, is reproduced in the Palestinian textbooks. You can find it that the PLO recognizes Israel as a sovereign country and it renounces terror. But this particular item in the book is not used or utilized in order to advocate for peace between the two parties. So it is sort of, I would say, a fraud, actually, which is not followed by all other school books of the Palestinian Authority and UNRWA.
Okay, thank you. Murray Rubin from Toronto asks, it's quite obvious that the Palestinian Authority lies as well as UNRWA. Why don't the Jewish communities in the world publicize these lies as a worldwide policy on the internet and through organizations around the world, and that the Jewish organizations support sort of expanding the knowledge of this issue? And Mr. Rubin said that he would even like to help in this issue.
Marvelous. Just what we need are for people like him to come forward and produce the truth, because all we want to say is, let's show the documentation. We're ready to go to every single parliament that supports UNRWA and show them what's being taught. And it's all what we call in the Talmud pshat. It's simple, it's clear. There's not something you can say there's another opinion. Here it is. Now, after Canada reinstated its funding, I went to both sides of the aisle and said, can we come back and show you what's going on? No one was willing to fund it, or no Jewish organization or Christian organizations was willing to fund it. And that's part of the problem. They said, well, it's going to happen. It's not going to happen unless some people make it into an issue and show it. And there's nothing to be hidden here. Everything should be disclosed. We're on the eve of a new school year. And the first thing that the PA put out when the coronavirus appeared was an entire conspiracy theory that the Jews invented coronavirus, and that's being taught in the schools. This can be stopped. And there's no reason why The Canadian representative in Judea Samaria cannot be asked to look into this. And what we get, we're writing all the time. And what do they write to us? That UNRWA is under rigorous supervision. By whom? They just use the word rigorous all the time. I'm glad they can spell it. That's as far as it goes. And by the way, something else which is extremely important, there's a brand new head of UNRWA named Philippe Lazzarini, a new head of UNRWA. He's from Switzerland, and he could be asked to follow through on basic policy issues, such as the school books, such as the issue of allowing people who have murdered people to have a platform in UNRWA. These are issues that can be easily addressed, and there's no reason why the donor nations can't have their representatives ask that question, and it begins in the parliaments.
Are there, in your experience, are there people in UNRWA that listen to you and are concerned about the issues you raise?
They're concerned enough that in 24 hours, UNRWA is going to have their own Zoom conference to answer us.
What, sorry?
UNRWA tomorrow at this time on June 4th is going to have a Zoom conference to answer anything that we say today. That's fine. They won't meet with us, and they also won't meet with the journalists. This will be their first public appearance of UNRWA since the new guy came in. The previous UNRWA spokesperson, when he said they didn't have any money, well, our staff checked. We had 12 students at the time who checked with the donor nations and said they were sitting on $1.2 billion, and the UNRWA spokesman had to leave. So UNRWA does pay attention to what we have to say. We never insult anyone personally. This is not a personal vendetta. We're dealing with the facts. And one of our advisors was the head of the civil administration's medical services, and he used to look at the services that UNRWA was not providing, especially in the area of infant mortality, and the disappearance, by the way, of medical equipment is a very big story, and UNRWA pays attention if you raise the issue.
Thank you. Arnon, you were going to say something?
Oh, thank you very much.
No, okay. Joseph Lashner asked, why isn't the plight of Jews from Arab countries ever discussed in issues of education and in this conflict, in this history?
It discussed it in Israeli curriculum, not in the Palestinian won't discuss it.
Well, look, again, the problem is a problem when someone makes it into a problem. Anytime you want to do a forum on this issue of what happened to the Jews who left Arab countries and went through their own traumas, just organize public forums on that subject. My first 17 years in Israel, I was working with Sephardic Jews and then with the Ethiopian Jews about their plight. And they didn't understand why people didn't know enough about them. Well, you can make an issue out of it and it's not a problem. UNRWA, because of its large budget and its tendency to try to show that they're suffering all the time. And by the way, one of the funnier things that happened, if you want to call it funny, after the United States pulled their money out on August 31st, 2018, the next day, new countries came in and replaced the money. Now we're talking about the UK, Germany, Qatar, Saudi Arabia. So we got a very, very promising note from UNRWA. We've solved it. But every single day, their PR firm puts out that because of the U.S. cutbacks, we have no money. So this is part of the issue. They're playing on the heartstrings of people, and they always show children suffering, and that's part of their deal. It's a theatric way of going about things, and that's really a shame because the other thing is one of the reforms that can be made in UNRWA. UNRWA cannot, by the way, I want to make something very clear. UNRWA cannot be replaced by another United Nations agency, even that would be logical. The United Nations High Commission for Refugees would take care of it because that would require what? That would require a United Nations General Assembly decision. So that's not going to happen. What can happen, UNRWA can copy the policies of UNHCR and help people relocate, go to other places, whether it's in Gaza or Judea, Samaria, or wherever. Right now, someone who lives in an UNRWA refugee camp who gets up one morning, I want to leave, UNRWA does not allow that to happen. And this is very important that they allow people to leave the refugee camps and act on the principles that Israel in 1983, we're going back quite a long time, Israel together with a number of people in the UNRWA camps created a project to help people relocate from the refugee camps. But UNRWA blocked it, the donor nations blocked it, and that doesn't have to be. I can just say that we can see a different view of things if we start acting differently.
A final question from Joanne Laurie. She asks, if we fix the textbooks, how do we fix the teachers? Because most of them receive the education in the first place that's poisoning the next generation. So how do you...
That's an easy question. Right now, the elections that take place in the UNRWA schools, in the UNRWA School Teachers Association, there are various terrorist groups that run. You can make a rule. There is already a rule on the books that anyone who's a member of a terrorist organization or selected by one cannot teach. And there's no problem with getting rid of those teachers who incite and who organize projects so that the children, whoever throws enough rocks, will be awarded the next day. That kind of discipline can be brought in. It's not a hopeless situation. The children are not a monolithic entity. The teachers are not a monolithic entity that can be worked with. But it's a matter of the desire to do something. And all I can say is, if we can get Germany and the other nations to wake up to an entity which is encouraging violence, encouraging war, encouraging murder, and to stop it. It starts with the donor nations and appealing to those donor nations. And that's been the message of Jewish history, is that people who tend to be in the situation of denial. There's no reason why these policies cannot be stopped if there's a desire of the donor nations to do so.
Okay, so David, on that note, and Arnon, thank you very much for your presentation and for your very important work. And again, one quick question. I know your website is israelbehindthenews.com. And where on your website is the list of donor nations? Somebody
on the right side, go down, you scroll down and it says, who funds UNRWA? Full disclosure, you'll be able to see it.
Okay.
Not a problem. This is fully, we're talking about open sources. Open on the top right, you'll see the school books translated and edited, translated, examined by Dr. Groiss and his team. You'll see them there. And if we ever find a school, people ask me, why don't you put out the school books that promote peace? Because I don't work for Disney. I work for this. I work for a project that tries to put out exactly what is, not what I'd like it to be.
So
it's 17 hours.
It's very important work. So again, israelbehindthenews.com. And it's very important, and continued success. And
by the way, we look for volunteers to approach the donor nations. We are just, you'll see on the lead item on our site, we're looking for donor nations, for volunteers to approach the parliaments, to approach the ambassadors, to approach consuls, and to approach the media. I do not think that the media is against it. The media simply doesn't know. And there's enough organizations trying to lie to the media about this issue that I believe I've been working with the press for 33 years, and I found enough reporters with integrity willing to hear facts on the ground.
Good.
Let my people know.
So continued strength and success. And just for the people listening, before we sign off, tomorrow afternoon in Europe, it'll be 4 p.m. in London, 6 p.m. in Israel, 11 a.m. on the East Coast of North America, Toronto, New York, 11 a.m. We're going to have a panel discussion entitled "The Festering Wound: Racism in the United States. Where do we go from here?" And we'll be speaking about institutionalized racism and the gravity of the situation in the United States, the threat to stability, and also, unfortunately, a part of this equation will be focusing on anti-Semitism by white nationalist extreme right. And also, as we saw in some of the vandalism, there were attacks really singling out synagogues and kosher stores, Jewish stores, with pro-Palestinian Islamist graffiti, which comes out of an element. And I think this is very important to understand the African-American community and competing interests within it. And within the Black Lives Matter movement, we'll have experts who will sort of unpack it and explain the complexities of Black Lives Matter, much of it aligned with the civil rights movement and the mainstream African-American community and churches, but certainly an element inspired by the Nation of Islam and the anti-Zionist, anti-Semitic rhetoric in the United States. So a very important meeting tomorrow at 11 a.m. New York time. So I hope many of you can join us. So everybody be well and be safe. And Arnon and David, thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.